Oh, hey there. You'll have to pardon my appearance today. We just finished switching out all the Casper local industries, and we had to run all the way out to Rocky Mountain Drilling today. That's way over on the east end of town, and there are 3 other industries on the same spur in between. We had to move and respot half a dozen cars. What a pain in the butt. But enough grousing. Welcome to the Chicago, Burlington, and Quincy Railroad in Wyoming. I'm Mark Pruitt, Casper Local Switch Engineer. Today is May 3rd, 2022, and this is Layout Update number 30. Hey, what did you think of that great new opening? Kind of reminds you of that song by Styx out of the 1980s, Too Much Time on My Hands? But that's enough of all that stuff. Let's get to the layout. I mainly focused on 2 things this month: scenery between Powder River and the Wind River Canyon, maybe a little tiny bit of which you can see behind me, and a caboose or way car construction project. There were a couple of other small things too right at the end of the month. Let me show you what happened. Oh, by the way, that whole getup was for Rich. You know who you are. At the end of March, my wife and I had just finished installation of the backdrop behind Powder River and Shobon. With that done, I dove right into putting down the base for the scenery in the corner. This took all of a couple hours to do. Then I started fiddling around with stacking pink foam board at the south entrance to the Wind River Canyon. I've never done this before, so I wasn't real sure what I was doing. In these shots, I'm just stacking up some foam to see what I get. Nothing is glued together at this point. You might notice that reefer on the track in these photos. There will be a tunnel here, and I wanted to make sure I had plenty of clearance. Here's that reefer, a John Allen style home-brewed track cleaning car made out of an Athearn reefer. This gave me some perspective on the canyon wall. After stacking up a few layers of foam, I came to the conclusion that I needed a solid base to build from, so I took some 3/4 oak veneer plywood left over from building my library shelves and trimmed it to fit on top of the benchwork. That'll make for a very solid base. I'm glad I didn't throw out that leftover plywood. With the plywood firmly attached to the benchwork, I took a deep breath and started gluing down the foam. For this, I began with DAP Alex Plus caulk, then later switched to low temperature hot glue. The caulk worked fine, but I could only do a couple layers before having to stop for a few hours to allow the caulk to start setting up. After a couple of days of very slow progress, I went back and took another look at using the hot glue. I found I could get low temperature hot glue at the local Menards for a pretty decent price, so I bought a pack and gave it a shot. It hardens fully in minutes and actually provides a more rigid joint than the caulk, so I switched to the hot glue exclusively. Now I could work at whatever pace I felt like. After putting down a couple layers of foam in the canyon with caulk, I switched back to the corner between Powder River and Shobon for the rest of the day, carving basic hilly landforms in the back. On April 15th, it was back to stacking foam in the canyon. In this second shot, that curve in the center will be in a tunnel with the north exit just this side of the curve. There will need to be a tunnel portal here. Up until the early 2000s, this is what that tunnel portal looked like. Nearly all the portals in the canyon look similar. Quick story while we admire this great prototype photo. Way back in the early 1980s, I built a model of one of the timber portals in the canyon. I was building a layout in Kent, Washington at the time. My CB&Q in Wyoming theme was just beginning to evolve. Well, personal circumstances forced a move, and that layout had to be dismantled. My sister and her family helped me move, and my niece was carrying my model of the tunnel portal. She turned suddenly and banged the portal into a stair railing. The railing was unscathed. Not so the portal. Remember back in December 2020 when my roundhouse suddenly converted back to kit form? Well, the portal basically did the same thing. It disintegrated into its component parts. But this wasn't a kit, it was scratch built. My niece felt terrible, but what the heck, I knew I could put it back together. Someday. We picked up the pieces and put them in a small box. There they stayed for many years. Well, someday finally arrived. Around April 10th, roughly 36 years after that portal came apart, I dug out the box it was in and started putting it back together. Here, it's mostly reassembled. Ironically, one of the few pieces that didn't come apart was the wing wall that you see here on the left side, and I didn't even need that anymore, so I had to cut it off. After completing the reassembly, I placed the portal on the layout to use as a guide when building the canyon walls in this area. 36 years later. Boy, I'm getting old. On the 19th and 20th, I continued stacking up the layers of foam at the south end of the canyon. For somebody without a clue what he's doing, I was making pretty good progress. You may have noticed the caboose, way car, in these shots. I was using it to check clearances in the tunnel as I was working. Checking clearances with the way car was all well and good, but it's only about 35 feet long. It's time to check with my largest locomotive and a train. That was successful, but I did have to reach inside the tunnel and trim away some foam that was a bit too close to the track for the locomotive. Don't tell anybody, okay? By the end of the next day, now working with hot glue, I had the walls stacked to the full height at this end of the canyon. For those who were curious, here's what the back side of the canyon looks like in this area. When the backdrop is up for Thermopolis, this will not be seen. So the wall's full height, but what about the area between the track and the benchwork edge? For that, I needed to have the fascia in place, so I installed one. In this shot, it isn't trimmed yet. See that thin piece of foam that the hot glue gun is sitting on? That's the bottom of the Wind River. I trimmed the top of the fascia, then installed the riverbanks and started shaping the blocks of foam into the rough shapes needed. I did that with a combination of a hot wire cutter and a Surform tool. The hot wire cutter was great for carving off big chunks of foam, and the Surform tool was equally good for finer work. The Surform also left the foam surface abraded and rough, making an ideal surface for later plaster work. But boy, it sure generates a lot of little tiny foam chunks. A few days earlier, I had ordered a 5-pound roll of plaster cloth from Amazon. It's about a quarter the price of the rolls you can get from Woodland Scenics. The cloth arrived on the 26th, and on the 27th I set up a card table and collected all the materials and tools I'd need to start putting the cloth over all that foam. I still didn't know what I was doing, but I was ready to do it. In the background, you can see that I taped over all the track to protect it from the coming mess. No sense putting off the coming disaster any longer. You can tell I was real confident, can't you? So I cut the cloth into 4 and 8-inch strips and put some down around Powder River. I didn't do very much, because if this wasn't going to work, I didn't want to have to redo too big a section. I walked away and left the plaster to dry overnight. The plaster cloth hardened okay overnight, so on the 28th I charged ahead. My wife even helped. I clipped the 16-inch ruler from my combination square to the table edge to help in measuring out the cloth for cutting. Overthinking it? Probably. That's what 40 years of being an engineer gets you. Anyway, we got to work. After about 3 sessions that day, I ran out of cloth just as I ran out of area to apply the first layer. After drying overnight, everything looked great. The plaster cloth even stiffened that stack of foam pretty significantly. I ordered 2 more rolls, and they're supposed to arrive today, so I can dive right in, putting on the second layer of cloth. Then will come a final coat of plaster, and then rock castings. Remember that prototype photo of the tunnel portal? Well, just for reference, Here's another photo of that area. Here's what the canyon wall around the tunnel portal looks like. I hope my finished product will do this some justice. So this is where we're at with scenery on this part of the layout. Let's move on to the way cars. Back in the early 2000s, Walthers marketed a CB&Q style 4-window way car kit in several different road names. There were singles and 2-packs like this one, giving a total of 3 different road numbers. With a lot more foresight than I usually show, I bought a bunch of them. I bought at least 2 of the Chicago and Northwestern 2-packs and 6 or 7 of the Burlington 2-packs and at least 1 of the Burlington singles. I knew I would need quite a few of these someday. I assembled the cabooses in one of the Burlington 2-packs right away and put the rest away. If you watched episode 8 of Building Casper, the operations testing episode, you'll recall that I made up some story about why there are no Chicago and Northwestern way cars on the layout. It's high time I fixed that problem, so I set about assembling 2 of those CNW cars. It looks like these way cars come almost assembled right in the box, doesn't it? Well, looks can be deceiving. Once you open the box, you find 2 plastic packages, one with the brake wheels and railings and ladders, and another with all sorts of bent-up steel wire, the grab irons. Well, this doesn't look all that hard. You do have to drill holes for all those grab irons, but the molded plastic parts have a tiny little drill start location already in them, so a couple careful hours work with a number 80 drill gets you there. Even just following the instructions without any embellishments gets you a decent looking model, like this one I put together when I first bought these kits. But in some respects, my expectations have deepened during the intervening time. This basic kit assembly is no longer sufficient. I want something more from the piece of equipment that brings up the rear of my trains. I've come to think that the way car is second in importance only to the locomotive when it comes to the makeup of a train. It should reflect that. I searched for some pictures of CNW cupola-style way cars on the internet, and I found a few. The black and white photo clearly shows marker lights in place, and the color one shows the grab irons painted black. It and a few other color photos I found also show that the bright red color of the Walthers model is pretty close. It's also close enough a model in terms of general appearance. Maybe someday I'll modify one to match a specific unit, but that's in the future. I've always wanted to have working marker lights on at least some of my way cars. I've just never taken the time to install them, until now. While I'm not exactly looking to make these way cars showpieces, it's time to build these the way I really want them, so markers are a must. Just think how great these things will look rolling through the canyon in the dark, markers and a dim light inside winking in and out as the train passes through the tunnels. To power the markers, I would either need batteries or some sort of electrical pickup from the rails. Since I didn't want batteries, I sprung for some of Katie's electrical pickup trucks. The first unit would have their arch bar style trucks. Of course, I couldn't just dump the 14 volts of my DCC system right into the markers, and I didn't want them lit up on all the way cars sitting in Casper Yard awaiting assignment anyway. Fortunately, both of those problems are easily solved by using NCE's Light It mobile decoder. These things are great. They're addressed just like a DCC locomotive decoder, but they have no motor driver. They're strictly for powering LEDs. In a pack of 6, they're just over $6 a pop at Tony's Train Exchange, so they won't break the bank either. Between the pickup trucks, the markers, and the light-its, I'm shelling out a bit over $50 extra for each of these way cars. But hey, the results will be worth it, right? So very early in April I started work installing the markers, trucks, and the light-it. The light-it also has provisions for a capacitor to provide keep-alive power, so I installed one I had on hand. Looks pretty big, doesn't it? For subsequent way cars, I bought some of the capacitors NCE recommended. Much smaller, and they work better too. Surprisingly, since I did the work, The markers worked great on the first try. This'll definitely look good on the tail end of a train. Now it's time to start drilling all those tiny little holes to install the grab irons. One problem, in none of the photos I found did those grab irons look like shiny new steel. In most of those pictures they look black, so I had to paint all those grab irons. Using a microbrush and some tiny clamps I bought when I was soldering wires to surface mount LEDs, I painted the grab irons with Model Masters flat black. Some of these things, especially the eye bolts, are really small. I made some headway, and by April 8th had some of the grab irons on one end of the caboose finished and installed. Then, through my own fumble-fingeredness, I managed to break my only drill bit that was small enough for this job. I continued painting grab irons, but I couldn't install them. Since no one out here in the boonies stocks drills that small, I ordered a pack of replacements from Micromark. About a week later, the drills came in, and I resumed installing the grab irons, which were all painted by then. I also installed the end pieces, which required painting themselves. With assembly finished, I had this. I touched up the end of the coupler pockets with black paint and lightly weathered the way car with chalks. The unit is complete. I took some pictures with room lights off. Here's a few of the better ones. I'm pleased with the results, but I learned a few things to do differently on way car number 2. The most important one? If you look closely at the ampersand in the lettering at the top of the side in this shot, you can make out a little bit of light bleed through the plastic car body, even though the interior light is turned down low. Lesson: paint the inside of the body to block this. Late in April, I started on the next way car. Here you can see that I've installed the recommended 2 smaller capacitors. That was lesson number 2 from the first way car. Wiring went much quicker this time, as I knew exactly how and where to mount the light. Here you can see the markers being tested. Here I've tucked all the wiring into the body in preparation for roof installation. The first way car took about 30 hours to finish all told, and I've got about 15 hours into the second one so far. I have all the holes drilled for the grab irons, but haven't installed them yet. I figure another 5 hours for that and for weathering. There is one semi-major faux pas I committed while building these way cars. Did anybody spot it? Let me know if you did, and be honest, because I'm about to tell you anyway. The markers are the wrong colors. I knew the Burlington used red, green, green markers, with red being to the rear and green to the sides and front. While red to the rear is pretty much universal on US rails, I think more common was yellow to the sides and front. So I ordered 4 sets of markers from Tomar, 2 red, green, green sets for the Burlington way cars, and 2 red, yellow, yellow sets for the Northwestern ones. Then I learned that the Northwestern also used red, green, green markers. Even knowing that, I installed the red, yellow, yellow markers on the C&W way cars anyway. I'm so ashamed. And you know what? To make it even worse, I'm going to do the same thing when I get around to building the other Northwestern way cars. I want the consistency between the units. Other than those of you watching this video, almost no one will ever realize this error. And so much for way cars this month. I did just a couple of small things not related to scenery or way car construction just yesterday. First, I mounted that small section of benchwork that goes between Thermopolis and Worland. Then I installed the throttle bus through the Douglas benchwork all the way to a point near my workbench. While not strictly necessary at this time, it will make testing powered equipment at the workbench much easier. While I have radio throttles, their performance is spotty near the workbench. Now I can plug in a throttle and not have to worry about missed keystrokes. Oh, I almost forgot. I did do a couple other things during April. Early in the month, I spent an entire day exploring and photographing the entire Wind River Canyon in preparation for starting scenery work. In the middle of the month, I spent a day exploring the area around Hudson. I talked to the mayor, who also gave me some great info on the railroad in the area. I learned of several mining spurs, and later drove around until I found them, which is what these photos show. And he also told me that Hudson had a significant set of stock pens that were used to ship out sheep in the fall. My model of Hudson will now sport the stock pens, but I don't think I have room to add the mining spurs. And that's it for the month of April. As promised, a bit shorter than last month's marathon presentation, but not quite as short as I thought it would be. I still have that one loco left to do maintenance on. I'll make a point to do that this month. I'll also try to get started on that Sidem kit I've been talking about. I'm woefully short of structures on this layout. Scene reconstruction from Powder River and on is on the list, of course, and I may even try to start building the benchwork for Worland and Grable. Thanks for watching, everyone. Feel free to comment on anything. I really enjoy reading what you have to say, and I always try to respond. Stay healthy, stay safe, and I'll see you next month.